the go-ahead for scientists to edit the eggs of human embryos? Does it advance scientists and help humanity, or does it cross an ethical boundary and increase the likelihood of designer babies? Joined from central London by fertility expert Professor Geeta Nagand and also by Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern. Ladies, thank you both for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. First of all, let's hear what Christian Concern have to say in response to the question that we've been asking this afternoon. Is this doing good or is this playing God? What do you think?
Well, I think that what it's doing is stepping across a boundary clearly out of sync with the scientific community across the globe. There's actually to begin to experiment on embryos is to begin to experiment on humankind. We were all embryos once. So it's crossing a clear scientific, moral and ethical boundary, which is totally out of sync with the rest of the modern world. Furthermore, the kind of thing that is being promised and promoted today, that it will give us information with regard to why there are so many miscarriages, or why, particularly with regard to IVF, is actually to misstate the situation. We know, in fact, that 60% of miscarriages occur because of chromosomal abnormalities, also to do with uterine receptivity. So that's actually not telling the truth with regard to the proposals for the reasons why this kind of experimentation is being proposed.
OK, let the Professor come in on a couple of those points, not least, are you playing God, Professor?
No, not at all. I think it's, first of all, let's establish some facts. Infertility affects 1 in 6 couples in the UK. 1 in 6 pregnancies end up in miscarriages. 50% of embryos fail to implant. What this approval by a regulator has allowed today is to research into normal development of embryos. What the scientists would do as part of their research is to edit out some genes to identify which genes are likely to reduce the development of embryos and are likely to lead to failure of implantation and miscarriages. It is a very important piece of research for us to understand normal, healthy growth of embryos. And I think it's very important at this point for me to state that this doesn't mean these embryos are going to be transferred to women.
No.
This is about research to try and help develop treatments, new treatments for infertility, and reduce miscarriages and increase the success of infertility treatment. In order to do anything more, in order to transfer embryos into women, we need to take it to Parliament for legislation. So I think it's very important to understand this is a basic science research which is essential to understand for us, very much needed as to how the embryos develop.
OK, so, Andrea, it's not about making a baby. It's about trying to explain what happens to cause a miscarriage, or indeed to potentially help infertile couples as well. Surely that's a very Christian thing to do.
Well, as I said previously, that would seem to be a misrepresentation of what's actually occurring here. But let's be clear here. We're experimenting on the human embryo. We're experimenting and destroying humankind. We were all embryos once. Now, germline therapy, and also this could be potentially intergenerational, so the impact of this could potentially have repercussions for generations to come. And let's also be clear with regard to all...
If I could ask you to answer my point, if you would, please. The fact that, as we heard there from the Professor, it could start to try to explain miscarriage, or it could help infertile couples. Isn't that a Christian thing to do?
I think it's very important indeed that we continue to look at reasons for infertility, that we continue to develop therapeutic solutions. But we should not do that at the cost of moral and legal and ethical boundaries. We should not do that by experimenting on one another, experimenting on humankind and destroying embryos. We were all embryos once. That's how we all began human life. And the notional idea that we can begin to experiment and actually change the genetic makeup of the human embryo is brave new world science, which puts us out on a limb from the rest of the scientific community across the globe. The scientific community says this is a far too dangerous thing to do. But we, again, in the United Kingdom, seek to push through, just as we did on animal-human hybrids just a few years ago, with a lot of hype and a lot of hope, talking about therapeutic causes, all of which have come to naught.
OK, Professor, how would you respond to that?
Well, look, I don't think there's a need for this moral panic. I think in the UK, we have a very long history of making considered and careful decisions when it comes to IVF and related technologies. This has been through a highly regulated body, and I think it's extremely important for us to know at this stage that we are doing research into understanding the development of embryos, normal development of embryos. This is about creating life. This is about helping infertile couples. This is about reducing miscarriages. This is about improving infertility treatments. This is about making safe and healthier treatments. I do not think there is anything here that could be called as playing God. This needs to go before Parliament, before anything is agreed to use this in treatment. This is not about adding genes. This is about trying to understand how we can create healthier embryos and how we can develop them further in reducing miscarriages. This has got to be a good thing. This is about creating life. This is about helping people.
Well, ladies, we always ask our audience to get involved in the Sky debate whenever they can. And Andrew David Farr has tweeted me this afternoon. Hello to you, Andrew. He says, I've left my body to the Human Tissue Authority. It's the same for embryos. It's the parents' genes, the parents' decision. Andrea.
It's not about creating life, it's actually about destroying life. That's actually what's occurring.
But if you could answer Andrew's point specifically, if I may push you on that, he says it's the parents' decision.
Well, he says that he's donating his body and that is his choice. When you create a life, then that life should have every chance of living. That life is a person. That life is you and me. The idea that we can begin to create and destroy at whim for scientific and utilitarian purpose is a brave new world and a very scary world. And as I say again, a world that is completely out of sync with the rest of the global scientific community. This is not about life giving. Indeed, the kind of science that this is talking about, this idea of gene editing, is not something that's going to prevent miscarriages. As I've said, chromosomal abnormalities are 60% the reason why miscarriages occur, all because of failed uterine receptivity to the embryo. So actually, for the scientists to take us up this track today in the United Kingdom is not to give us the full picture. Let's be clear, if we create a life, then we should truly care about that life, to give that life every chance in its own genetic makeup to live. This idea that we can create and destroy at whim is really quite horrific if we begin to think of it.
Professor, we've heard from MC Tempo, who's tweeted this afternoon, saying this doesn't mean genetically modified babies yet, alas, the thin end of the wedge. And one of the main concerns is that unforeseen consequences later in life, I suppose, with children who potentially have had edited genomes.
Look, we are actually hypothesizing something here which is not what is happening. This is
not yet,
about
Professor. That's the point. That's the point that the guest is.
I totally agree with you. But at this stage, it is about gene editing out genes to understand which genes are leading to failure of embryos to develop and implant. So I think we need to make it very clear that the spare embryos are donated by couples for this research. It is not about creating embryos and destroying for that reason. This is very much about giving the chance for embryos to continue to develop and implant and become babies. This is very much about giving them a chance. This is not about taking away the chance, and we have to have such basic research before we can help patients.
Okay.
And I think it's important.
Andrea, let me bring in a tweet, if I may, from Peter Treasadon, who has tweeted me this afternoon. Hello, Peter, good afternoon. He says it's called progress, and with the right safeguards in place, it might alleviate many of the causes of maternal heartache. Again, a Christian thing to do.
I think that we need to look at all the many and wonderful developments that are being made, even in gene therapy, which are absolutely ethical. Last year we heard of the first...
But you're not saying this is unethical, are you?
Certainly to experiment upon an embryo and to destroy that embryo or to alter a gene line, and potentially, yes, it would need to come before Parliament, but that hasn't stopped this kind of development occurring before. We have the passing of animal-human hybrids, which we said would never occur in Parliament just 2 or 3 years ago. So things that we say will never happen certainly do occur, and to have a gene-altered embryo that is then implanted would have massive intergenerational concerns and ramifications. We're experimenting upon the human race out of sync with the rest of the global community. But what we should be doing is the kind of wonderful research that has occurred where there has been gene editing and terminal leukemia has been thwarted, as in the case of Layla Richards just last year. And that's where the thrust of science should be focused. It's good because it's good for humanity, it's kind and it's wonderful, and it's just exactly where the science should go. When we think that we can play around with lives, with human embryos that can live and experiment upon them and then destroy them, that is destructive and cruel.
Okay, final thoughts from the professor. Any of these embryos could live?
Yes, look, the knowledge we will gain from this very important research is actually going to help develop new infertility treatments. This is not just gene therapy, it's understanding about development of embryos and how we can improve infertility treatments. I think it's very important that we keep that in mind, and we can debate this again before it goes before the Parliament.
OK, good to talk to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. Clint Griffin has tweeted, hello to you, Clint. Thanks for your contribution this afternoon. He says, altering embryos could lead to magnificent improvement to humans. We need to evolve. Nature is too slow. That's our debate for 3:30 this afternoon here on Sky. We've got another one for you at 4:30. What's it about? Stay tuned and find out.